We are all aware of the ideological movements involving race in our society today. Black Lives Matter movement, critical race theory, and white privilege, to name a few. So how are we as Catholic men supposed to navigate this very delicate and often heated topic? How do we avoid taking a passive or an avoidance or even subservient role and instead bring the love of Christ into the conversation? We are joined today with a great man, a great guest, and a very knowledgeable man to help us navigate this struggle. So stay tuned.
Welcome to another episode of the Catholic Gentleman Podcast. And we are very honored and excited to have our guest today, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, with us. And I look forward to introducing him in just a moment. But before we get there, I just want to mention a couple notes. If you're listening to this on your podcast player of choice, please subscribe. And if your podcast platform has reviews, I encourage you to leave a review. It really helps the word get out about the podcast and the work that we're doing here to encourage men in their faith. So subscribe, leave a review if you can. And if you've really enjoyed the content that we're producing, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/CatholicGentleman. We have some great tiers for you there, but also it's just a great community of men of like mind who are discussing and encouraging each other on many topics related to Catholic masculinity. So check that out, patreon.com/CatholicGentleman. It's a great community for you, and it helps support the work that we're doing here. But as I mentioned, we are joined today by the dynamic Deacon, Harold Burke-Sivers. And for many of you, he needs no introduction, but if you aren't familiar with him, he is one of the most sought-after speakers in the church today. He travels across the United States and all over the world, speaking at conferences and workshops and retreats, parish missions, just about anything you can imagine. And he really wants everyone to know Jesus Christ intimately and to strengthen family life, help people discern the will of God, embrace the sacraments, and especially he has a heart for men. And he's written a book about men, which we maybe talk about later. But thanks so much for being with us, Deacon Harold. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Sam and John. It's great to be with you guys.
Yeah, and John and I have both been at events where Deacon Harold has spoken, and man, we can all testify that he brings the fire. He will not let you embrace complacency. He gets you fired up. But today we're going to talk about, as John said, a very delicate issue, an issue that is very relevant to the world today, but also one that people struggle to navigate because it seems like there's just polarizations on either side. And it's hard to know sometimes where political angles or motivations end and the truth begins. And that issue is racism. And that is something that's been a part of our society, especially in America here for many centuries. But we, John and I felt the heart to bring Deacon Harold on to discuss this issue from the perspective of not only an African-American, but an African-American Catholic, and to talk about what the church has to say on this issue. So kind of just before we get to that though, Deacon Harold, can you just tell us a little bit about how you ended up becoming a deacon, how you felt God's call in your life, and how you really have faced this issue perhaps in your own ministry?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Barbados in the West Indies, and we're first generation to come to the United States. My mom was the first Catholic in our family. So she was Methodist and became Catholic, converted when she was a teenager. I'm the oldest child of her marriage with my dad, and so I'm actually the first baptized Catholic in our family, because of course my mom came into the church, she didn't have to be rebaptized, just confirmation and first communion. So I'm the first baptized Catholic, been Catholic my whole life. Some people say, well, you sound Protestant, you a convert. I'm like, no, I've never been Protestant. And I don't sound like a Protestant. I sound like a Catholic who's in love with Jesus.
Amen.
That's what I sound like.
Amen. I love it.
And so
I like
I've
that.
gone to Catholic schools my whole life, grade school, high school, college, and graduate school. We're all at Catholic institutions. When I was about 10 years old, I felt a very strong pull or tug or attraction to the Mass. And I remember, in fact, we went to Mass. My father wasn't Catholic or a man of faith at all. So my mom took us to church, and she would sit me in the pew on the aisle, right on the aisle, and she would stand next to me. And then my siblings would be on the other side of her because they were typical kids, like, bumping each other, throwing Cheerios and stuff. And but I was laser focused on what was going on up at the Mass. My mom wanted me to stay focused. And I remember thinking, even at that age, 10 years old, there's something really cool going on up there. I don't know what it is, but I like it, And then I got old enough to serve Mass, and I loved being on the altar and serving Mass. I remember one time in particular, it was my turn to ring the bells. Father O'Connor, who still had the Irish brogue, right, was about to elevate the Eucharist. And I remember thinking, I could totally see myself doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I just had that clear thought. And so when I got to high school, I went to a Benedictine high school run by Benedictine monks, St. Benedict's Prep in Newark. And they had a come and see program. So I did the come and see program all 4 years of high school. First person in my family ever to go to college, went away to Notre Dame, graduated, worked for a year as I was discerning monastic life. After my year of discernment, I joined the Benedictines, enjoyed my time there immensely. And then my mom got sick. My parents were divorced by then. My mom got sick and almost died. And I'm the oldest. And so I helped my mom with the family when my dad left. And so I left the monastery temporarily to help take care of my mom till she was able to go back to work. And then I went to a wedding. Those couple of months I was out of the monastery, and I met my wife at a wedding. So didn't go back, but I still felt a pull or a tug, that wouldn't go away. And so my wife was from Oregon, so that's how I got from New Jersey to Oregon, and that pull, that attraction never went away, and it ended up finding its fulfillment in the diaconate. And so I was accepted into the diaconate program at 30 years old, which is very young. And it's a 5-year program. So I was the youngest man ever ordained a permanent deacon in the history of the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. And I've been a deacon now. In fact, November will be 20 years that I've been ordained. So
congratulations.
Thank you. I have 4 amazing children, 3 daughters and a son, including twins, one girl, one boy, a set of twins. And I worked in law enforcement. When I left monastic life, I got to law enforcement and worked there for 23 years until I left that 10 years ago. In fact, July 1st of this year is 10 years to the day since I transitioned out of my career, my law enforcement career, into speaking and writing full time, which is a whole nother story in itself.
Yeah.
But so the call to the diaconate has been a tremendous joy in my life. And people often ask me, what's the greatest part about being a deacon? And they think I'm going to say, having 9 television series in EWTN or traveling all around the world. I've been to 23 countries so far, preaching the gospel. And they think that's what I'm going to say. But it's actually, those really special moments where, people have skeletons in their closet and they open that door and allow you to come in. When a kid is getting a cancer treatment at the Children's Hospital across from the parish, and the child is 5 years old and they're writhing in pain, and their parents are there, and you're there representing the church to be with those parents in those moments. It's when a 5-month-old child dies of crib death, and the parents ask you to preach at the funeral and to lead the rosary, at the funeral home the night before. And you're trying to hold it together because you've never seen a casket that small before. You know, it's the woman whose husband, she's been married for 30 years, who's dying at the hospital across the street. And you go to be with her, and you're with her at the moment her husband takes her last breath. I mean, those are the moments, the great graces of how we get to be in people's lives and how we get to serve the body of Christ as deacons. That is really the greatest reward, the greatest fulfillment that I've experienced in 20 years as a deacon.
Well, let me just say thank you for that journey you just took us on. That is incredible. And I want to just call out a couple of things on what you stated for our listeners, because we've got a lot of fathers, we've got a lot of new fathers. We get those questions a lot. I mean, I likewise had a very similar experience to you, being an altar boy and just falling in love with Christ and falling in love with the church and thinking, I need to look into the priesthood because of this, probably around the same age. And I, however, didn't come from a broken family. My dad was very active in the faith and never divorced. And so, I mean, just you're thriving though, and we can just hear it. And I just love, and I want to call that out for our listeners. Like if your fathers, you know, to really discern being active in your son's life and in their development, but also, you know, considering helping them be an altar boy and to do that well, because, you know, that really link and connection that you just brought to us. And then you were a police officer, correct? And you, wow. And you've been all over the place. This is just incredible. So thank you for that. I'm just really appreciative of that. So you wrote a book called Behold the Man, A Catholic Vision of Male Spirituality. I have the book. It's a great book. What inspired you to write that? I feel like just felt called in your conversation here, this episode going out to, you know, it'll be over 10,000 men that'll listen to this. You know, why did you write that book? What did you see in our society that caused you that inspiration for you to write that?
Yeah, well, John, I mean, for me, it comes out of personal experience, right? So I talked about, you know, we're from Barbados. My father was a very popular singer and songwriter and nightclub owner, and he lived like one.
Wow.
You know, my father had multiple affairs. He has at least 15 other children from other women, besides the 4 of us with my mom that we know of. And that's no exaggeration. Wow. I mean, we're able to verify 15, although my relatives say there's more than that, but we're able to verify 15. My father was not a man of faith, wasn't baptized, never went to church. The only time we ever heard him use God's name was as a curse growing up in our house, and he smoked and all that. I mean, so not a lot of very pleasant memories growing up with my dad. And after they got divorced, you know, and this is the way I described that time, Sam and John. People say, well, what is it like? Often teenagers say, what is it like to be a child of divorce? Because they're not stupid. They see something's going on in their own house and they're worried that the parents are going to split up. So I tell them the truth. I said, marriage is a beautiful thing. It really is. But it's also the cross. And divorce is when the parents put the cross down and the kids pick it up. You know, and that's never a place you ever want to be in your marriage. Now, after I discerned out of monastic life and I was on this course to get married, I almost didn't get married because I was afraid. So I didn't want to end up like my parents did. You know, but there's a couple of things that the Lord taught me. First of all, I am not my dad, right? I can make different decisions and different choices because I've chosen to put Jesus Christ first and foremost in my life. So how I act, how I think is not dictated by the culture. It's not dictated by social milieus. I put on, as St. Paul says, the mind of Christ. Right? I focus my life completely on Jesus Christ. And so I was thinking about all of this, and then I was asked to do a series for EWTN on male spirituality because Father Mitch Packwell was my scripture professor in graduate school, and he invited me to be an EWTN. And so I said, what are we going to talk about? He goes, you know, you wrote a paper on male spirituality. Why don't you talk about that? And so I did. and it got incredible response. EWTN has never had a show on for men. And they saw the response of my one interview with Father Mick. So they asked me if I could do a series based on this conversation. I said, I think so. So I wrote an outline, about a 60-page outline that I used, for each of the 13 episodes. So fast forward now, several years later, I leave my job 10 years ago. I get a call from Mark Brumley at Ignatius Press. Now, Mark Brumley was also an adjunct professor. I was at the University of Dallas at graduate school.
Oh, sure.
During the formation for the diaconate. He was an adjunct professor there. And so he called and said, hey, Deacon, I heard you left your job. Do you have time to write a book for us? And I said, oh, sure. This is what I do now. Why now? And so we were talking about what we're going to write about. And, I said, there's no books out there about a theology of Catholic male spirituality. And what I mean by that is this. There's some great books out there, right? Because Steve Wood has been writing on male spirituality, but about fatherhood or pornography or priesthood or chastity or virtue or those kinds of things. But I could not find a book either written by Pope, Magisterium, nothing, that looked at the theology, the underlying theology of what forms a man as a Catholic man, a Catholic male spirituality. Now, tons of Protestant books out there that talk about a Protestant approach, but what are and they're wonderful books, and a lot of Catholics have read them, right, and benefited from them. But I saw it was lacking the focus on a man's life rooted in the sacramental life of the church, most especially the sacrifice of the most holy Eucharist and the theology of the cross. And so when Mark and I decided to write, to explore this male spirituality, I said, okay, the two things I want to focus on are the hermeneutics, or the interpretive key that underpins the whole book, are two things. St. Paul's theology of the cross, right? Because our Protestant brothers and sisters don't have a crucifix. They have a cross, but no Christ, right? And so I want to focus, what does Paul say? I preach Christ and Christ crucified. I want to know nothing, St. Paul says, except the cross of Jesus Christ, right? What does it say in 2 Corinthians? I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, right? So that was one. And the other one was St. John Paul II, was just an absolute hero of mine. No question, no doubt about it. And in his anthropology, he's written a lot about women, right? Mulieris Dignitatem, the dignity and vocation of women, letters to women, but not about men. There's parts of Familiaris Consortio where he talks about fatherhood. There's Quamquam Plurius, which is written by Pope Leo XIII, with John Paul II, wrote Redemptoris Custos, Guard of the Redeemer, on St. Joseph, right? But nothing specifically about an authentic Catholic male spirituality. So I took John Paul II's anthropology, applied it to a male spirituality, united with St. Paul's theology of the cross, and that was the kind of the thought process when I was writing this book. Yeah. And so every chapter builds on the chapter that came before. So I start off with what is a male spirituality? Then I look at it from a biblical perspective. Then I look at it from an anthropological perspective, theology of the body, sin, reconciliation, all those kinds of things. I talk about work. And then I look at Ephesians chapter 6, right? The armor of God. So I took the last chapters, each piece of the armor of God, and I apply a male spirituality principle to each of those pieces of armor, so that everything I've written in the book puts flesh on the bone. So it's not just all theory, not just all ideas, but here's how we live it out every day as men of God. So that was kind of how the book came about.
Oh, praise God. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I know there is such a huge need. And I think even now that your book is written and things like that, that there's still this longing among men for guidance in this area. And so really it's about this point, it's about telling people about the book, like getting the word out. And like I know John and I recommended it to people, and I just would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast and hasn't read it yet, check it out, because there's so much rich content there that will help you embrace your vocation as a Catholic man, specifically a Catholic man. So
You know, what's interesting, one of the criticisms that I received, because I mean I do read the Amazon reviews, right? I mean, I don't respond to because I don't care.
Sure.
But one of them said it was too intellectual. So here's the thing, you know, here's what I think about you. I didn't want to water down John Paul II.
Yeah.
He can't, I mean, the man's brilliant. He had 2 doctoral degrees, for goodness sake, and he's a saint. I don't want to water him down. So it's just like lifting weights, right? In order for the muscle to grow, you have to push that muscle, and in fact, till it tears, and then it builds back up in layers. That's how you build muscle. That's how you build strength. That's how you build endurance. And so there are parts of the book that's a little bit, you may have to read it a couple times,
Mhm.
you know, but it's just like lifting weights. You intellectually, you're straining, and once you get it, right? Because I want to tear that soul muscle, that heart muscle,
Yeah.
right? So that people see the depth of the beauty. I want to elevate the conversation about male spirituality to another level. I'm not saying I'm trying to establish a new way to be a man or anything like that. I was trying to elevate the conversation so that it's taken much more seriously. You know, not so much academically, but to see that there's some serious things for us to think about as men at every level of our faith life. You know, another criticism, people said that it was too catechetical. People don't know their faith, for goodness sake. You know, people don't know. They don't even, look, remember, even before COVID, 70% of Catholics did not believe that Jesus Christ was present in the Eucharist. That's one of the basic foundations of our faith. People don't know their faith. So I wanted to also make sure I'm catechizing men in this book as well. So they're connecting the stuff, the head with the heart.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to challenge them intellectually so that the head and the heart meet. So now you have a holistic approach to male spirituality. It's not just the head, it's not just the heart, it's a beautiful marriage and synthesis of both. And, you know, that's another thing I was trying to accomplish in the book. So yeah, there are parts of it that, you know, I didn't want to water it down, but it's not, you know, so far over your head that you can't get it. And that's why I put a lot of the heady stuff in the footnotes. Right.
Yeah.
So if you really want to go deep, I put that into the footnotes. So if you just want to skip the footnotes, you'll still get tremendous benefit from the book for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, I was speaking at a college, what was it, Southwest Missouri State University. And this was a Newman Center. And after the talk, a young lady came up with one of my books, the male spirituality book, Behold the Man. I was like, oh, you have my book. She goes, yeah, my dad gave it to me because he wanted me to read it to see what my future husband looks like. I was like, what? I never thought of using the book that way. You know, and here's a dad who read the book himself and gave it to his daughter. So I was like, wow, I never even thought of using it that way. You know, but that's beautiful how men have used this book. I mean, it's in about 8 countries around the world in study groups. Men are using it. And I've been to these countries. I've been to those study groups myself. So it's humbling when you see men taking what you've done and adapting it to their culture and then implementing it, you know, in their, you know, so I've been South Africa, Singapore, Malaysia, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana. You know, it's just really humbling to see the response of men around the world. And when I wrote the book, I didn't think, oh, it's going to be around the world. I just thought I want to contribute to this conversation in a serious way.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful to God to be able to do that.
Yeah, we are too.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, God bless your mother, because she instilled a love of the faith in you. And look at how many, the ripple effects that's had. Like one person's faithfulness, one mother's faithfulness has actually led to thousands of lives being touched and changed all over the world. And I think that's a beautiful reality. But I also just want to say too, you know, like, I like that you're challenging men, because we need to think critically. We need to not be caught up by fads and talking points and propaganda and whatever. And that kind of leads to switching gears a little bit to this issue of racism, where it feels like people give up on this issue because they say that's all it is. It's just political slogans. It's things on t-shirts, and like maybe in their heart they feel like racism is real. Like there are people who've been deeply hurt by it. There's been grievous wounds in our culture, but every time I try to engage with this issue, I just get bombarded with the Marxism or the white guilt or like the critical race theory, or like, and then they just think, well, I don't want to be a Marxist. Like, I don't want to embrace that. So maybe this issue is just not something to engage with, and they just throw it away. But like, we need to think through this carefully. And that's why we wanted to have you on, was to get your perspective on this, because it is such a difficult issue to navigate without seemingly running into these all or nothing black and white thinking approaches, where it's just, you either care about it but that also means that you embrace the 100 other issues that seem to be attached to that, or you don't care at all about it and it's not even a big deal. It doesn't enter your awareness. So we don't think about that, So, so I guess just to get us grounded here, like, what is racism to you? Like what does that word even mean in your mind?
Yeah. So you have to make a distinction between racism and prejudice. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So prejudice is, with regard to race, is a preconceived notion about someone that's not based on any factual or objective experience. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a preconceived notion about someone that's not based on any factual or objective experience. Okay. That's prejudice. So racism is prejudice, with the added piece that the reason I believe this is because I believe my race is superior to your race. That's racism. Yeah. So let me give you a concrete example. And this is the one I use in the book. I was at a parish mission not too long ago, and one of the people found out I did my undergraduate work at the University of Notre Dame. So he came up to me and goes, "Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What position did you play?" Okay. So people would say, that was racist. That was racist. It wasn't racist. It wasn't racist. It was prejudice. Why? I could see the calculus in his mind. Big black guy plus Notre Dame equals football, right? Yeah. That's what he was thinking. Oh, look at the size. You must have played football. But here's the thing. I've never played football in my life. My high school didn't even have football. The Benedictines couldn't afford it. There's no football field or anything. I wrestled for 4 years in high school, and I had an academic scholarship to Notre Dame. So, I mean, if you put pads on the floor, I have no idea what to do with them. You know what I mean? So what it was a preconceived notion, right? That wasn't, but he didn't know me. He didn't know my experience. He just looked at me and made a judgment. That's prejudice. In order for that statement to be racist, he would have had to have meant, when he said it, the reason why I'm saying this, that what position did you play, is because the only way a person of color can get into Notre Dame, they're definitely not smart enough. So you must have had an athletic scholarship. That's not what he meant. Because when he found out that I had an academic scholarship and never played football, he was embarrassed. Oh my goodness, I'm Deacon, I'm so sorry. So you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So his statement was prejudice, but it wasn't racist. And the problem is today, Sam and John, is that everybody is lumping everything under the umbrella of racism. You're racist, you're racist, you're not. Stop. We have to stop and think about what is racist and what is not. You see? So that's the first thing I do in the book. We have to define our terms here. Obviously, so groups like Ku Klux Klan and white supremacist, other groups like that, obviously are clearly racist. And the other thing we have to do, we have to make a distinction between institutional racism and people in institutions who are racist. Right? So the United States, of course, used to have institutional racism. I mean, slavery, duh, right? I mean, come on, that's clearly a system that was accepted as racist. The Supreme Court decision the John F. Sanford decision, where it was enshrined in the Supreme Court of the United States that Black people were property and not human beings, right? And then in the postbellum era, we had Jim Crow laws, which was the law of the land. So there's no question that there's institutional racism. Okay, there was institutional racism, but now we have to look at what's going on today. Are there still systems in place where there's institutional racism? And the answer is yes. But let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So in the book, I talk about a story of a Protestant minister who in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who bought a golf course. Now, they didn't buy the golf course because they want to, all their church members to play golf. They bought it because they want to control what happens and what's being built around that church. Okay. So in process of purchasing the golf course, and under the history of the golf course, it was all white, Black people were not allowed, people of color were not allowed, blah, blah, blah. And so when the segregation laws changed, the civil rights laws changed in the 70s, they had to change the policy of the golf course. So here's what they did. They said that anybody that wants to join has to be nominated by someone on the board. And then the majority of the board has to approve this person. So one guy on the board thought, oh, this is great. I got a friend who's Black, who, he loves playing golf. He'd be a great addition. So he nominated him, and every person of color that was brought before the board was rejected. See? So even though the law changed, the institution still practice racism. See, that's institutional racism, as opposed to people in institutions who are racist. For example, you cannot say the Catholic Church is racist. Why? The Catholic Church was founded by Jesus Christ. The church is the spotless bride of Christ. But there are people in the church who are racist. Yeah. Right? You see? So we have to make that distinction. The church cannot possibly be racist. But there are people, we're all sinners in need of God's mercy. There are people in the church who are racist and practice racist ideology. So those are the distinctions that we need to make, that our culture are failing to make. And here's why this is happening. One of the things I did was I went back and I read a lot of writings of Martin Luther King. And he was absolutely spot on in his approach to dealing with issues of race. The problem is this: since he died, there's been a leadership vacuum and a leadership void in the area of race. Right now, we have no Martin Luther King. We have no voice. And because there's this void, you have these individuals and organizations that are trying to fill that void, not by closing the racial divide, but by trying to introduce ideologies that have absolutely nothing to do with healing racism. Absolutely nothing. But they put the veneer, it's like a Trojan horse. The outside says racism, but inside is a whole other agenda that has nothing at all to do with healing racial division or closing the racial divide. That's the problem. So what I tried to do in this book, which is coming out in the spring of next year.
Great.
What I tried to do in this book was to say, look, here's racism, here's what's not racism. Here's an example. I talk about the Bible. I go through examples. For example, they always say St. Paul endorsed slavery. He says slaves have to obey their master. Okay, hold on. There's like 6 different types of slavery that are mentioned in the Old Testament. Which one was Paul talking about? Oh, wow. And I show clearly that he was not talking about chattel slavery, because over and over and over again, because the people of Israel themselves were slaves. And therefore, the law was very clear in Leviticus and Numbers that they were not to enslave anybody the way that they were enslaved, right? Because remember, they were the mouthpiece for God, but they used one word to describe different types of race. For example, criminals, right, that were serving sentences. Like, for example, we have guys that go and pick up garbage. You see the guys in the jumpsuits that pick up garbage on highways and things like that, right? Yeah. They would have called that slavery in the Old Testament, right? Or you have 6 kids and you have child number 7 and you can't feed child number 7, you would give that child to another family, and that child would work as an indentured servant for that family, right? They would call that slavery. Now, indentured servants had rights. They had rights that had to be respected by the person they worked for. In fact, that person could, at the end of their service time, could become a member of that family and have inheritance rights. You see, these are all things that I had to bring out in the book so people understand that when Paul is talking about slavery, he's not talking about chattel slavery that we think about what happened in this country. And so it's those kinds of distinctions I try to make clear in the book.
Excellent. Oh, I think that's terrific. And I really like that divide between prejudices and racism. And I mean, I can see prejudices within my own life, you know.
Oh, we all have
them.
We all have prejudices. Come on, look. You know, when I first started traveling, started going to the South, right? I thought, well, everybody down here eats shrimp and grits, right? Because that's what you do. And some people hate shrimp and grits in the South, right? I'm like, wait a minute. I thought, you know, we all have prejudice. We all have that. Why? Because they're formed. Now, we're not born racist. Yeah. We're not born with prejudices. Think about it. You anecdotally, right? My kids, I'm married to a German and Irish woman, amazing woman.
Yeah.
We have mixed race kids. And so when our kids used to go on the playground, you have Asian kids, Hispanic kids, Japanese kids, Black kids, and everybody's playing. The kids don't care. They're just kids playing. I'm not going to play with you because you're Black. I mean, you don't see that on the play. But what happens over time? They get exposed to television. They get exposed to other family members where they hear jokes about other races. They get exposed to social media. They get exposed to all these external stimuli that are bringing in these ideologies and things that they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, you know, this is the way that culture thinks about these types of people, you know, and so you start to form prejudices. You start to form these ideologies. Sometimes it turns into racism, sometimes it doesn't. But we all have prejudices, whether it comes to race or when it comes to food or when it comes to whatever. We all have this. We have to recognize and acknowledge that we all have these, because that's the only way we're ever going to make any progress.
That's right. Not be held in bondage to them and to grow and you know, and mature. Absolutely. I think that's great. I want to take a moment and shift to this because I have friends and family members even that have kind of adopted this critical race, you know, ideology and this critical race theory. And I know that you have spent a lot of time researching this and getting into this because that one takes a whole nother level of like, you can't avoid it. I'm white. And so therefore I am a part of the problem. And it leads to this direct division, and I would say, you know, kind of antagonism between me and any of my best friend in high school was a Hispanic guy. Before that was a Black guy. Now a Black guy, obviously a kid when I was younger. And like you were just saying, that just really resonated with me. So when we're struggling with talking to our family and friends, you know, about critical race theory, I find myself struggling to even relate to them. And I think part of the reason is because I don't fully understand it. And so I would love to take an opportunity here for you to explain to us critical race theory, you know, white privilege, these sort of things that are pervasive in our society today, so that as us as men, we can better understand that. And then we can hopefully talk through this episode about ways to, again, to bring Christ into that, but also to engage in conversation in that. So if we could start with some terms there, I think that'd be incredibly helpful for me.
Yeah. So let me explain why I even got into this part in the book. Now, what I try to do in the book, in the middle part of the book, was to talk about ideologies in our contemporary culture that people are trying to bring into the conversation about race that are actually not helpful and actually make things worse. So I looked at but that was not my thing. My original thinking was, okay, people are talking about liberation theology, critical race theory, and the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, I don't know. I knew about liberation. I've wrote a paper on liberation theology, so I understand Father Gutierrez and that whole thing. So I understood that. But the other two, I said, you know what? Maybe there's something there. I went in with an open mind. Maybe there's something there that we can learn from. Maybe there's something where we can connect. And maybe, so I said, well, instead of listening to this political pundit or that theologian, I said, let me read for myself.
Yes.
So I bought the books of the people who developed critical race theory: Richard Delgado, Janine Stefanik, Kimberly Crenshaw. So I bought their books and I read it, and it took me a month to write that. In fact, I was going to put all three of them in one chapter, but I realized quickly that each of these individuals are so deep that I have to separate them into three separate chapters. So what I'm hoping doesn't happen is that people focus so much on critical race theory, what I'm writing in the book, that they think the book is about critical race theory, and it's not.
Good.
It's not. It's about a Catholic response to racism.
Yeah.
But I felt I needed to address the ideologies that people are trying to bring into the church as they think is going to help, and it doesn't help at all. So that's where I got the critical. In fact, I'm just going to say, there's a book coming out by Dr. Ed Fazer in the fall that is about critical race theory, the Catholic approach to critical race theory. He sent me a review copy of it. I think it's phenomenal. That book is about critical race theory. My book is not. Okay.
Great.
So what I tried to address critical race theory specifically, can it help in the discussion to help ameliorate racist ideology within the life of the church? That's what was my approach. So now, in understanding what critical race theory is, so critical race theory doesn't look as a biological distinction or cultural differentiation between people of races. Okay.
Yeah.
They don't look at biological distinction or cultural differentiation. For them, race is a social construct. All right. So race is something that's constructed, that's not by natural law. It's something that's constructed by the culture. Okay. And where people that are not of people of color, so basically white people, develop hierarchical structures and that oppress people of color, right? So that's their understanding of race. So what critical race theory tries to do is to liberate people from these oppressive hierarchical institutional structures through major societal and political change. Okay. So just from that piece of it, you could already see the problem from a Catholic perspective. Sin is personal and societal. Okay. But Jesus didn't come. Jesus came to bring salvation to individuals, to conquer sin and death with the power of love.
Right.
But you don't see any of that. For critical race theory, the way they see making change, these major societal and organizational and structural political changes, is through conflict, struggle, and discord. Right? Where does that thinking come from? Okay, follow me here. Okay, I'm gonna make this as easy as possible. Critical race theory comes out of critical legal theory from the 1970s. Okay, and that looked at what I talked about before. Even though the laws have changed, there's still underlying racism within institutions. So it looked at the legal ramifications of that. Okay, nothing wrong with that. That was fine. But that came out of critical theory from the 1920s, which comes out of actually Marx and Freud, right? Not Marx and Engels, but Marx and Freud, dialectical materialism. Okay. Wow. So basically what Freud and Marx did, they took this idea of the dialecticalism, which basically says that the Hegelian dialectic, right? So Hegel came up with this dialectical approach to thought. So here's what's his thing, and he applied it basically to hard sciences, right? So you have a thesis and a counter antithesis, and the tension and the conflict and the struggle between the thesis and the antithesis leads to a new synthesis. Okay? So what Marx and Freud did was to take that Hegelian model and apply it to psychology and to sociology and to political theory.
Wow.
See, Hegel had not done that. So what they did, so what did Freud do, which eventually became communism? You have the proletariat, the thesis, the bourgeois, the antithesis, and the tension and conflict and struggle between those two lead to a new synthesis, which is what? Materialistic or atheistic communism.
Yeah.
You see? So that's what, and Freud did the same thing in the area of psychology. And so the effect that that's had now is that the hermeneutic or the underlying principle for critical race theory is the way you fix things is by tension, conflict, struggle, and discord. That is not the way Jesus Christ came to fix problems in the world. He wanted to bring people together, not to tear people apart. So by its very name, and I go through the 5 basic tenets of critical race theory, and I explain how each of the, again, these are tenets brought out by the people who developed critical race theory, not by Deacon Harold.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, so I look at them, I said, okay, let's look at it from a Catholic perspective. Can we accept this or not? And the answer is clearly no. So it's nothing personal. So I don't do ad hominem attacks. I don't do personal attacks against the people who develop critical race theory. I'm attacking the actual position, what they teach, which I believe has no place at all in the Catholic Church. It just doesn't. But now it may be useful for other disciplines, but it has no use for us as Catholics. And so you have people that are trying to bring this thinking and bring this ideology into the church, and they're doing it because I guarantee they have no idea what this really is. They don't. Yeah. They just think, oh, this is the latest new thing. We have to we're white, so we have to, help. We have to be less racist and have less white guilt. So we have to bring critical race theory in. Wrong answer. Right? It is not the answer. Jesus Christ is the answer. Amen. And that's why I spend the whole last part of the book giving specific details of how we can how I think the Catholic Church, I believe this with all my mind and heart, the Catholic Church can be the leader in this area of race. I personally am sick and tired of the Catholic Church always coming from behind on serious societal issues, right? Like marriage, for example. When a whole debate about marriage was going on, what did we do? We did nothing. We said nothing. Why? Partly because the bishops were still reeling from the sex abuse scandal.
Yeah.
So they lost tremendous moral credibility, because who are you to tell us about abortion? Who are you to tell us about what marriage is when you're abusing kids? See, so what did we do? We backed off. It's okay, well, let's talk about safe things like the environment and migrants and immigrants. Important issues. They are important. I'm an immigrant myself, okay? Those are important issues. But kids are not leaving the church over immigration. They're not leaving the church over Mother Earth. They're leaving the church because they don't know Jesus Christ.
That's right.
They don't have a deep, personal, intimate relationship with the Lord. That's what we need to be focusing on. And I believe that in this area of race, that we can actually take the lead, that the society can learn from us as Catholics how we can actually face this issue head on, have those difficult conversations, do it at the parish level, and really begin to build, a society of love and trust, that what Martin Luther King wanted to do, and in fulfillment of the teachings of what Jesus Christ calls us to do.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, and that is totally possible, and I love that call to the church to take the lead on this issue. I'm curious though, you mentioned that Jesus Christ had a way of bringing people together, but it defied expectations. There's among the Jews too, there's this suspicion of the Samaritans because they were kind of mixed race, mixed beliefs. The religion was kind of muddled up with different beliefs, and then there, of course, there's the Roman oppressors who were kind of oppressing the Jewish people in that time. And so I think with the messianic longing, there was this kind of expectation that the Messiah would come in and he would almost do this like Hegelian thing and like stir up discord, stir up conflict, call people to arms, pick up your swords, we're going to battle, we're going to purify, the land, and so it was just fascinating to see though how Jesus turned all those expectations on their head. And this idea of power, this is like really big thing in I think in a lot of Marxist thinking and even critical race theory, this idea of power. Well, and power essentially is synonymous with abuse, it seems like, in any kind of Marxist ideology. But we see Christ who says all power is given me, on heaven and on earth, and like he had all the power, and yet what did he do with that? So could you kind of address how did Christ deal with this issue in his own time, and maybe how some of the saints dealt with it subsequently, but then what can we learn from that kind of as the church perhaps thinks about taking the lead on this issue, answers that call that the Holy Spirit may be extending to the church right now?
Yeah, Jesus taught love, mercy, and forgiveness. Okay, because you're right. Even the apostles themselves thought that Jesus was going to be a political leader, right? That's why Judas sold him out. When he saw that Christ wasn't going to be this, pick up arms and fight against the Romans and take back, what was rightfully belonged to Israel, he sold them out. Remember, even in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they came to arrest Jesus, Peter pulled out his sword. Okay, it's time, and cut off the guy's ear, right? Because he thought, okay, this is the time of the insurrection. This is the time we take things back. Even after the resurrection, the apostles said, remember, is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom? they didn't get what Jesus was all about, right? And over again, Jesus defied expectations. For example, the woman caught in adultery, okay? Why did they bring the woman to Jesus? They tried to trap him because Jesus is teaching love, mercy, and forgiveness. So if he says, because it wasn't the penalty for being caught in adultery, it was being stoned to death, right? So they brought this woman, so she was caught in the act of adultery. What should we do with her? If he says stone her, they said they're going to point out the contradiction. Wait a minute, you're teaching love, mercy, and forgiveness. And now you're going against your own teaching by saying to take this woman's life. But if he says, don't stone her, you can't be the Messiah, because the law says that caught in the act of adultery, you're going to be stoned to death. So they think, we got him. What does Jesus do? He bends down and writes. We don't know what he wrote. He wrote something in the dirt. Okay. Now, this is just Deacon Howard's opinion. This is not church teaching, because no one knows. It's not recorded anywhere what Jesus actually wrote on the ground. I think he wrote, "Where's the dude?" Now, why do I say that? In Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10, and Deuteronomy 22, verse 22, it says clearly, both the man and the woman caught in adultery are stoned to death. Not just the woman. People think just the women were stoned to death. No, the man and the woman, both. So, but they only brought the woman to Jesus. But they say she was caught in the very act of adultery. I mean, she was with somebody. How come they didn't bring him? If they're going to get Jesus on a point of the law says both. Why did they only bring her? I think Jesus was pointing out the contradiction of their own position. That's what I think. That's just me.
That's fine.
See, but that was the message that Jesus brought constantly over and over again. The woman at the well, right? The Samaritan woman. Jews have nothing to do with Samaritans. They didn't even share utensils with them or anything. But yeah, he says, give me a drink. First of all, he's talking to a woman alone. Then he's talking to a Samaritan woman. Then he's asking to share utensils. I mean, he's 0 for 3 here. but Jesus, again, said, look, none of that matters. Yeah. What matters is this person standing in front of me. This person who's a sinner in need of God's mercy. Because he pointed out to her, oh yeah, the guy you ain't married to him. In fact, he's like your 5th husband. And she's like, oh, dang, this dude's a prophet. He just called me out, And see, it's through that. That's what Jesus came to bring. And what he said to woman caught in adultery, go, does anybody else judge you? No. go and sin no more. Stop doing what you're doing. So he called people out. He brought to attention those things that were separating him from God's love. And then he brought God's love and mercy into their life. He brought healing into their life, right? And so the way I end the book is to get to your point, John and Sam, is with the Good Samaritan parable, right? So here you have, they're on the road to Jericho. Now, that road still exists to this day, by the way. In fact, what's interesting, where that road is it's very isolated, and it's very, hilly. And so it's a perfect place for a robber to mug somebody, right? So people would have known that was a place where robbers, that's why Jesus talked about it. But it's also, if you look at Psalm 23, the valley of the shadow of death, that's where that road is located. And I was just there a couple of months ago when I was in Israel, and I got a chance to see it. It's actually quite amazing. And so the guy gets mugged, Samaritan guy, laying at the side of the road. The priest walks by, does nothing. He was probably walking the other way on his way to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, they weren't supposed to touch the corpses or the blood of anybody except family members, corpses of family members. There's one exception. But so the guy didn't want to, I don't care about this dude. First of all, he's a Samaritan, so I don't want to have anything to do with him anyway. Plus, he's bloody. I'm not going to touch him, fend for himself. Then the Levite, who's the deacon, I hate that part. He walks by, same thing, ritually impure, he's not going to touch him. But here's the thing. Why didn't they call the police? Why didn't they tell somebody else on the road, hey, you know what? There's this dude down here. I'm not going to touch him, but you may want to help him. They did nothing. That part gets me. And the other part is this. Jesus knew the situation was going on with the Samaritans. Remember, but how many times did Jesus go over to the Gentiles to preach to them? Remember the guy that was in the cemetery with no clothes on? We drove the demons into the pigs and they ran off the cliff. I mean, so Jesus did not shy away from bringing the good news to the people, the Gentiles. It's interesting. When Jesus does a miracle, he tells the Jews, don't say anything to anybody. But when he does something for the Gentiles, go tell everybody.
Yeah,
you see?
Exactly.
So it's a different approach here. So Jesus understood all of this when he was telling the parable. All of a sudden, this Samaritan comes by. The Samaritan sees the Jewish guy at the side of the road, and he has mercy and pity. Now, when Jesus asks at the end of this, right, we all know how the parable goes. At the end, he goes, which one of these guys was the one who helped him? And remember the guy said, the one who showed him mercy. Yeah. He couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan helped him. He couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan because that's how much they hated him. He said, the one who showed him mercy. Yeah. Right? So that showed the disdain that they have with Samaritans. When the Samaritan dude comes along, sees the guy on the side of the road, picks him up, takes him to the hotel, gives him, I think it was 3 coins, but I think they would have denarii. So denarii would have been 2 days' wages. So he gave him enough money to take care of him, heal, take care of his wounds and stuff. He goes, look, if this ain't enough, I'll get you on the way back. He told the innkeeper. He showed the guy. So Jesus was establishing a new standard of holiness. That holiness and mercy and love is not just extended to people of your race. This is extended to everyone whose heart is open to truth. And what is truth? Truth is not a philosophical construct. Truth is not an ideology. Truth is a person. Jesus Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Truth is a dynamic relationship with the living God. That's what Jesus was talking about in that parable. So he was saying, go likewise and do the same. Mercy is not just for you. It's not just for people of your race. You are to extend love and mercy to all people whose hearts are open to receiving the truth and love. And not even them, but also your enemies. Remember, Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something, we can't even do that now. I mean, how many masses were said for Osama bin Laden?
Right.
After 9/11? Well, we have to pray for Osama. Let's offer a mass for Osama bin Laden for his conversion. No, let's be real. How many people actually did that? Because
Right.
this guy killed 3,000 people. I mean, so it's hard. What Jesus asks us to do is hard. It's difficult, but it's the gospel. And that's the point of my book. We have to have these hard, difficult conversations. We have to face our own sin. We're all sinners who need God's mercy. We have to face our own prejudices, maybe even our own feelings of racism, acknowledge that we are sinners, and turn to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I outlined, just based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, the Catholic faith, how we can actually bring racial healing to our faith and ultimately to our world.
Amen. Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate that. And as is always the case with these episodes, is we just, scratch the surface of all the stuff that we could possibly talk into, but that's the nature of them. And so I'm just so grateful. So I want to give you just a moment, though, let people know where they can learn more about you, Deacon Harold, and where they can, you mentioned the book's coming out next year. However, we will put in the show notes, locations for your website and your other book on masculinity and stuff. But if you could let us know a little bit, let those who are listening on podcasts know where to find you, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I made it real easy for everybody. DeaconHarold.com. That's it. I mean, if you scroll down, you see all my social media. You'll scroll down, you'll see all the books. I have 5 books. They're all pictured there. You just click on it and you can order the book right either through. I did it through the publisher because I'm not a huge fan of Amazon, but
Right.
but you could order the books through the publisher by clicking on each book and buy the book through the publisher. Or you can get on your favorite Catholic bookstore. We got to support our Catholic bookstores, our brick and mortar stores. They're having a hard time competing with the online stuff, but I try wherever city I go to, I try to go to the Catholic bookstore and support them. So also go to a Catholic bookstore to pick up a copy of the book as well.
Well, thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Deacon Harold. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to getting the book and reading it and kind of getting more in-depth knowledge on this issue. And I think it is so relevant. And we thank you for your passionate and intelligent comments on this. It's been great. So, but as we like to end every episode, John,
be a man, be a saint.